Imagine waking up one morning to find a letter taped to your door. A notice of violation from a homeowners association you never even joined. You laugh at first, until the fines start piling up. The threats turn legal. And one day, you're holding a foreclosure notice for your family's 180-year-old home. The house your ancestors built before the town even existed. This isn't fiction. It's the chilling true story of one man's desperate fight against a corrupt HOA that tried to steal his legacy through lies, bureaucracy, and greed. But when they pushed too far, he pushed back. And what happened next? Exposed one of the most outrageous HOA scandals ever caught in court. Stay till the end, because the twist in this story will make you rethink what it means to own your home. This is The House That Fought Back. To really get why this fight became my entire world, consuming every waking thought and haunting my dreams, you have to understand the house itself. It's not just wood and nails and plaster. It's a living member of my family. It was built back in the 1840s, a simple but solid colonial farmhouse that stood on this piece of land long before the town around it even had a name, long before the roads were paved. My great-great-grandfather, a man who had seen the country torn apart and put back together, bought it after the Civil War. It was his piece of peace. He passed it to his son, who passed it to his, and on, an unbroken chain of trust, responsibility, and love that eventually led to me. I grew up in these rooms. My entire childhood is mapped onto its geography. I can still find the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe where my dad measured my height every single birthday. He'd make a big ceremony of it, pressing the book flat on my head, telling me to stand up straight, and making a sharp, proud line. The last mark, from my 18th birthday, is still there, just above his own. There's a worn-down patch on the third step of the main staircase, a gentle scoop in the solid oak, created by a century and a half of feet. My ancestors rushing down for breakfast, my mother carrying me up to bed, my own children learning to climb. It's a testament to the life lived inside these walls. The giant oak tree in the backyard. My great-grandmother planted that as a sapling on her wedding day in 1902. I have the faded photograph, a sepia-toned image of her in a white dress, patting the soil around a stick-thin tree, her husband beside her. And I have another photo, taken from the same spot, of my own kid learning to walk in the deep, cool shade of its massive branches. That tree has witnessed more of my family's history than any person alive. This house isn't some perfect, sterile showpiece. It has its quirks, its personality. The floors creak in a language only I understand. A groan in the hallway means the temperature is dropping. A pop from the attic means the sun is high. A window in the attic has old, hand-blown glass, a pane they must have saved during some long-ago repair. It makes the world outside look like a wavy, dreamlike painting, blurring the sharp edges of the modern world. These aren't flaws. They're the house's soul. Taking care of it was never a burden. It was the greatest honor of my life. My family didn't just own this house. We were its caretakers, part of it, and it was part of us. My property is a 5-acre plot, an island of history surrounded by the slow, inexorable creep of suburbia. For decades, the land around us was just fields and woods. But about 15 years ago, a developer bought the surrounding 200 acres for a massive planned community. They called it Heritage Pines, which I've always found deeply ironic, considering they bulldozed every bit of actual heritage and every single pine tree to build it. They replaced a century of natural landscape with a sea of beige houses, each one a near-identical copy of the next. From day one, it was clear where my land ended and theirs began. My property line is marked by a beautiful, rugged stone wall that's even older than the house, assembled by farmers in the early 1800s from the very rock they pulled from the soil. It's on every single survey map and county record, plain as day, a thick, unmissable line. Their development is a totally separate legal and physical entity. When people buy a house in Heritage Pines, they sign a mountain of documents, explicitly agreeing to be part of a homeowners association. They agree to its rules, its regulations, and its dues. It's a contract, a choice they make. I never signed that contract. I never agreed to be part of their association. Why would I? My home is a registered historic landmark, not a cookie-cutter house in their subdivision. My property is legally, historically, and geographically distinct. It's like owning a classic sailboat and being told you have to pay for the upkeep of the private airport that got built next door. For over a decade, that's how it was. They built their community. I lived in my house, and the old stone wall separated our worlds. We were just neighbors, existing in different centuries. I had no idea that on the other side of that wall, a group of people were cooking up a scheme born of boredom and arrogance that would threaten to burn my entire world to the ground. It all started with a single piece of paper, a weapon disguised as mail. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a credit card offer and a pizza coupon. A crisp white envelope with the professionally printed Heritage Pines HOA logo in an elegant, swooping font. I almost tossed it, figuring it was just misdelivered mail. But something made me pause. Curiosity, I suppose. I opened it. Inside was a notice of violation. The words were cold, sterile, and official. I felt a flicker of confusion, then amusement. The notice claimed I was in violation of CC&R Section 8, Article 4, Subsection B, Unapproved Shutter Color. It demanded I repaint my shutters to an approved color from their palette within 30 days. I actually laughed, stood right there in my kitchen, holding this ridiculous piece of paper, and laughed out loud. My shutters were black. They'd been black since the 1950s. I have a color photograph of my grandfather, brush in hand, proudly painting them the very same shade of glossy black. More importantly, what authority on God's green earth did they think they had over my house? It had to be a mistake. Some intern in a cubicle farm 100 miles away probably typed in the wrong address. I tossed the letter on the counter, made a mental note to call them and clear up the hilarious mix-up, and moved on with my evening. I had no clue that this absurd piece of paper wasn't a mistake. It was the first shot in a war I didn't even know had been declared. That first phone call should have been a massive, blaring red flag, a siren in the back of my mind. I found a number for the HOA's management company, a third-party firm they hired to do their dirty work. I was polite, even cheerful, fully expecting to share a laugh with someone about this simple misunderstanding. "Hi there," I said, when a woman answered. "My name is John Smith, and I live at 125 Old Mill Road. I think I received a violation notice from you by mistake. My property isn't part of the Heritage Pines HOA." The woman on the other end, whose name I would learn was Carol, was defensive from the word go. Her tone was flat and bored, like I was the 10th person she'd had this exact conversation with that day. "What's the address?" she snapped. I gave it to her. I heard the aggressive clacking of a keyboard. A long, deliberate pause. "Our records show your property is subject to the CC&Rs, she stated flatly, as if reading from a sacred text. "I'm sorry, but that's completely impossible," I said, my cheerfulness evaporating. "My house is 180 years old. It predates your entire development by more than a century. It's not part of the land tract that makes up your HOA. You can look at the county parcel map." "Sir," she said, and her voice dripped with the kind of condescension that only a petty bureaucrat can truly master. "The system says you are. If the system says you are, then you are. You need to repaint your shutters to an approved color. You have 30 days to comply, or a $50 fine will be assessed." I was stunned into silence for a moment. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance was breathtaking. It was like talking to a brick wall, if the brick wall had a superiority complex. Can you please tell me what document you have, what deed or covenant, that includes my specific parcel in your association? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We don't provide legal documents over the phone, she recited, the words clearly part of a script. If you wish to dispute this, you must do so in writing. Send a letter to the board for review. And with that, she hung up. Not a goodbye, not a have a nice day. Just a click. I was more annoyed and frustrated than worried. This had to be some power-tripping administrator, a keyboard warrior drunk on the tiny bit of authority her job gave her. So, I did as she said. I wrote a formal, detailed letter. I was meticulously polite. I included a copy of my deed, a printout of the county tax map clearly showing my parcel was separate, and a firm but respectful explanation that they had no jurisdiction. I even included a brief history of the house, hoping to appeal to their sense of, well, heritage. I sent it via certified mail, complete with return receipt, so I'd know they got it. A month later, another letter arrived in that same crisp white envelope. My return receipt was tucked inside, proving they'd received my letter. But the contents showed they hadn't read it, or simply didn't care. It was a bill, a $50 fine for failure to comply, and, to add insult to injury, a $25 late fee. My detailed, evidence-backed letter had been completely and utterly ignored. This was the moment a cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was deliberate. The notices started coming like clockwork, a new one every few weeks. They had clearly put me on some kind of hit list. It was no longer just about the shutters. My fence, that beautiful historic stone wall that had marked my property for almost 200 years, was suddenly a non-compliant fencing material. The violation notice said all fences had to be either white vinyl or black aluminum. I stared at the letter, then at the ancient, moss-covered stones of the wall, and the sheer absurdity of it made me feel like I was losing my mind. Then, it was the wildflowers I let grow in the meadow near the road. I loved them. They were a little patch of chaos and color. To the HOA, it was an overgrown and unkempt lawn violation. Fine. The antique copper weather vane on my barn, a silhouette of a rooster that had spun in the wind for a century, an unapproved architectural embellishment. Fine. They even sent me a violation for a small vegetable garden I had in my side yard, citing a rule that gardens could not be visible from the street. They were literally fining me for growing tomatoes. With every letter, the bill grew. 50 became 200, then 500, then 1,000, plus late fees, plus administrative processing fees, plus violation notice mailing fees. It was insanity, a masterclass in manufactured debt. I made more calls, each one ending with a hang-up from Carol. I left more messages that were never returned. I sent more certified letters, each one vanishing into a black hole of their deliberate ignorance. One Saturday afternoon, I saw a woman standing on the public road in front of my house, staring at it with an undisguised look of disgust. She was scribbling furiously on a clipboard. She had the unmistakable air of someone who derives their only joy in life from finding fault in others. I walked out to my driveway. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She looked up, a sour expression tightening her face. "I'm on the Architectural Review Committee for Heritage Pines," she announced, puffing her chest out as if it were a royal title. I'd later learn this was Karen, the board president, the Queen of Beige. "Then you're on the wrong side of the stone wall," I said, pointing directly at it. "Heritage Pines is over there. This is my property. You have no authority here." She gave a smug little smile, a chillingly confident smirk. "That's where you're wrong. The documents are very clear. We are all one community. And frankly, your property is bringing down our values with its rustic state. She spat the word rustic like it was an insult, a disease. My family's historic home, a place of genuine heritage, dismissed as a shack because it didn't fit her sterile, vinyl-sided world. The conversation was pointless. I was talking to a zealot. She was a petty tyrant, utterly convinced of her own power, and in her mind, her kingdom had just expanded by 5 acres. It was after that encounter that the really scary letter arrived. This one wasn't from the management company. It was from a law firm, on heavy, embossed letterhead designed to intimidate. It was a notice of intent to file lien. I had to sit down and look up what that really meant, and the answer turned my blood cold. A lien is a legal claim placed on your property for an unpaid debt. It clouds your title. If you don't pay the debt, the lien holder can, in many states, force the sale of your property to collect their money. The legal term is foreclosure. This HOA, an entity I had zero legal or contractual connection to, was threatening to put a legal chokehold on my home, my inheritance, my entire history, over a few $1,000s in completely fabricated fines about tomatoes and wildflowers. How? How could you place a lien on a property you don't govern? It felt like being stalked, but with lawyers and letterhead. The amount they claimed I owed had now ballooned to over $2,000. The original ridiculous fines were a fraction of the total. The rest was an obscene, towering pile of late fees, interest, and, most outrageously, the HOA's own attorney's fees. They were forcing me to pay for the lawyer they had hired to threaten me. It was a perfect, closed loop of extortion. My hands were shaking as I held that letter. The laughter from that first day felt like a bitter, distant memory from another lifetime. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, predatory attack. They seemed to know my property wasn't theirs, but they were betting I wouldn't have the resources or the will to fight their team of lawyers. They saw my historic, paid-off home not as a piece of history, but as a plump, juicy target they could squeeze. And I was beginning to realize they would not stop until they had taken everything. And then the legal assault began for real. The intent became a reality. Despite my frantic pleading calls to the law firm, where I was stonewalled by a paralegal who just kept repeating, "The board has made its decision," the process moved forward with the terrifying, impersonal speed of a machine. About a month later, I got an automated email alert from a title monitoring service I'd signed up for years ago and forgotten about. It was a simple, one-line message. A new document has been filed against your property title at parcel ID 77B12. I knew exactly what it was. I drove to the county courthouse, my stomach a tight, churning knot of acid. The building itself, usually a symbol of order and justice, felt ominous. I gave my parcel ID to the records clerk, a kindly older woman who had no idea she was about to hand me a declaration of war. She disappeared into the archives and returned with a single sheet of paper. And there it was, in stark black and white, an official stain on my family's legacy. A claim of lien, filed by the Heritage Pines Homeowners Association, for the sum of $2,145.18. Seeing that document, with its official county stamp and filing date, made the nightmare tangible. It wasn't just threatening letters anymore. It was a real, recorded claim that clouded the title to my home. I couldn't sell my house. I couldn't refinance it. I couldn't even get a home equity loan to pay for a new roof. My home, which had been owned free and clear by my family for generations, was now legally entangled with these predators, shackled to their manufactured debt. The emotional toll was devastating. Sleep became a luxury, a forgotten country I couldn't visit. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through catastrophic scenarios. I'd walk through the rooms of my own house and feel like a ghost, a trespasser. The joy and peace I'd always found within these walls were replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become the source of my deepest fears. I started losing weight. My work suffered. Every conversation with friends or family inevitably circled back to the situation. A dark cloud that followed me everywhere. The house felt like it was holding its breath, and so was I. I knew I needed a lawyer, but my first few attempts were crushingly disheartening. The first attorney I spoke to, a general practitioner in a small office, seemed overwhelmed. He looked at my stack of papers, his eyes glazing over. "Wow, HOAs are tough," he said, leaning back in his chair. "They have a lot of power these days. Fighting this is going to be expensive, and honestly, it might be cheaper to just pay them the $3,000 to make them go away." Pay them? The suggestion felt like a punch to the gut. Pay extortionists to validate their crime? I left his office feeling more alone than before. The second lawyer, an HOA specialist, was even worse. He was slick and cynical. He glanced at the lien for about 10 seconds. "Look, they filed the lien. To the court. A lien is a lien. You can argue about whether it's valid or not, but that's going to take months, maybe years, and cost you 10 times what they're asking for. In the meantime, the clock is ticking on foreclosure. My advice? Negotiate it down. Offer them $2,000. Cut your losses." I walked out of his office into the bright sunlight, feeling completely hopeless. It seemed the system itself was designed to favor the aggressor. The burden of proof, the financial cost, the emotional stress, it was all on me, the victim, to prove that my house was, in fact, my house, and it was going to cost a fortune to do it. Before I could find a third option, the final blow landed, the one that made the world stop. It arrived via certified mail, a thick envelope that felt heavy with doom. I remember standing in the kitchen, the afternoon sun slanting through the window, illuminating the dust motes in the air. I sat at the kitchen table where my family had shared thousands of meals, my hands trembling so badly I could barely tear the envelope open. It was a notice of foreclosure sale. The words blurred on the page. The HOA had filed a lawsuit to foreclose on their fraudulent lien. A court date was set. A sale date was scheduled. In 90 days, unless I paid the now insane sum of over $10,000, the original debt plus thousands in new legal fees, my 180-year-old family home would be sold on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. To satisfy a debt I never owed. To an association I never joined. Over the color of my shutters. That was the all-is-lost moment. I looked out the window at the old oak tree my great-grandmother had planted. I saw the scuff marks on the floor from my own childhood. I could almost smell the pipe tobacco my grandfather used to smoke in his favorite armchair, and I felt a grief so profound it was like a physical weight on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. They had done it. They had pushed me to the edge, and the ground was giving way. The nightmare was here. They were actually going to sell my home out from under me, and I felt utterly powerless to stop them. For a few days after that foreclosure notice arrived, I was paralyzed. I was a ghost in my own home, a tourist in my own life story. I moved through the rooms in a fog of despair. The weight of 180 years of family history felt like it was crushing me. I'd touch the worn banister, the cool glass of the window panes, and feel like I was saying goodbye. The house was filled with the echoes of my failure. How could I be the one in 7 generations to lose it all? Then, one evening, I was standing on the back porch, just staring out at the property as the sun went down. My eyes settled on the gnarled trunk of that old oak tree. I thought about my great-grandmother planting it, a young woman full of hope for the future. I thought about the generations that followed, facing world wars, the Great Depression, illnesses and loss. But they had always held on. They had protected this place. They had weathered real storms, not trumped-up notices from a petty tyrant in a neighboring subdivision. Was I really going to let my family's legacy be erased by a petty, greedy HOA president and her cronies? Was I going to let them steal this history over a fake debt about the color of my shutters and the existence of my vegetable garden? A fire, small at first, started to burn through the fog of despair, an ember of anger. It grew into a roaring blaze of indignation. I thought of my father making those pencil marks on the doorframe, so proud of my growth. I thought of my grandfather on that ladder, painting the shutters. They didn't raise a coward. They didn't protect this home for a century and a half, just for me to roll over and surrender it. No, not this house. Not on my watch. That decision changed everything. The despair didn't vanish, but now it had a companion. White-hot rage. The next morning, I wasn't looking for just any lawyer who would tell me to settle. I was looking for a warrior. I spent hours online, digging past the slick ads, searching for real estate attorneys who specialized in wrongful liens, slander of title, and fighting corrupt HOAs. I searched for news articles, case histories, anything. I finally found a name. Mr. Davies, a lawyer in a nearby city who'd recently won a high-profile David versus Goliath case for a small business owner against a massive developer. The article described him as unflappable and relentless. I called his office, expecting to get a secretary. He answered himself, "Davies." His voice was gruff. I started telling my story, the words tumbling out, probably sounding like a rambling, incoherent mess. I explained the age of the house, the separate deed, the stone wall, the first notice, Carol, Karen, the lien, and finally, the foreclosure notice. I just kept talking, unloading the whole nightmarish year. But he didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finally finished, breathless and exhausted, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I held my breath, bracing for more bad advice. "That," Mr. Davies said slowly, his voice calm, steady, and edged with something I hadn't heard yet. Anger. "That is the most flagrantly illegal, predatory, and malicious abuse of the lien process I have heard of in my entire 30-year career." I almost wept with relief. It was the first time someone in a position of authority hadn't just sympathized, but had validated what I knew to be true. He saw the injustice in its raw, ugly form. "They have absolutely no legal standing to do this," he continued, the steel in his voice growing more pronounced. "A lien can only arise from a contractual or statutory obligation. You have no contract. Therefore, this isn't just an improper lien. This is a fraudulent lien. It was filed with malicious intent, with the full knowledge that they had no legal right to your property. That's a tort, a serious one." For the first time in almost a year, a glimmer of hope broke through the suffocating darkness. He was giving my enemy a name. He was speaking a language of power I didn't understand, but I knew it was the language we needed. Mr. Davies then laid out the plan. "We are not going to simply defend against their foreclosure," he said, and I could almost picture him leaning forward at his desk. "That's a losing game. It puts us on the defensive. We are going on the attack. We're going to file a countersuit, and we are going to hit them so hard they won't know what happened. First, an emergency injunction to halt the foreclosure sale. Then, a quiet title action." He explained that a quiet title action is a powerful lawsuit that asks a judge to definitively settle ownership and invalidate any and all competing claims. "We're going to legally erase them from your property's story," he said, his voice ringing with confidence. "And after that, we're suing them for wrongful foreclosure, slander of title, and we are going to seek punitive damages for the harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are not just going to get you out of this. We are going to make them pay for what they did." I had walked into this fight a victim. After that phone call, I was a plaintiff. I had a plan. I had a champion. The fight for my home was finally, truly on. Mr. Davies's office became my war room. The man was a whirlwind of focused aggression. The very next day, he filed for an emergency injunction to stop the foreclosure sale. He attached my deed, the county plat maps, and a sworn affidavit from me detailing the entire history of the harassment. The judge, seeing the clear evidence of my deed from the 1800s and the HOA's own development boundaries, which explicitly excluded my parcel, granted the injunction almost immediately. The sale was stopped. That first small victory felt monumental. It was breathing room. The executioner's axe had been stayed. Now we moved to the main offensive, the quiet title action and our countersuit. The next phase was discovery, where both sides are legally required to hand over relevant documents. This was where the HOA's house of cards didn't just tremble, it completely fell apart. Mr. Davies subpoenaed every single piece of communication they had related to my property. Emails, text messages, board meeting minutes, internal notes from the management company. Everything. At first, they tried to stonewall, claiming the communications were privileged. Mr. Davies filed a motion to compel, and the judge, already annoyed by their case, ordered them to produce everything. What we got back was a treasure trove of malice. It was a smoking gun, times 10. It was a complete written confession. We found an email chain from right before the very first violation notice was sent. It was between Karen, the board president, and Carol at the property management company. Carol, the woman who had been so rude and dismissive on the phone, had actually written, FYI, the property at 125 Old Mill Road is not part of the Heritage Pines development. The deed and plat map are clear. We should remove it from the compliance inspection list to avoid any issues. Karen's reply, sent less than 10 minutes later, was chilling. Leave it on the list. The owner is single, has deep pockets according to his property records, and the house is an eyesore. It looks like a haunted farm. If we start finding him, he'll either clean it up to our standards or he'll get tired of the fight and pay up. If he fights, our lawyers will bury him in paperwork. It's a win-win for the association's curb appeal and our bottom line. There it was. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, premeditated strategy of extortion, born from aesthetic snobbery and greed. They knew, in writing, that they had no legal right. They just didn't care. They saw me as an easy mark. Another email from Karen to the rest of the board called my historic home the blight at the entrance to our community, and argued that applying pressure would be a net benefit for all property values. The climax of this battle wasn't a dramatic, multi-week courtroom trial. Their case was so weak, their malice so evident, that it all came down to a summary judgment hearing. This is where a judge reviews the undisputed facts and can make a ruling without a full trial. Their lawyer, looking pale and nervous, tried to argue there was some ambiguity in the original development plans, fumbling through maps and trying to create confusion where there was none. Then it was Mr. Davies's turn. He stood up, calm and composed. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the facts, one by one, like a surgeon making precise incisions. He presented my deed. He presented the county survey. He presented the HOA's own governing documents. And then he put Karen's email up on the courtroom projector for the entire room to see. He read it aloud to the court, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, letting the words themselves provide the drama. He'll either clean it up to our standards or he'll pay up. Our lawyers will bury him in paperwork. It's a win-win. A profound silence fell over the courtroom. I glanced at the judge. His expression was stone. He had taken off his glasses and was polishing them slowly, his eyes fixed on the projected email. The smug, arrogant mask on Karen's face finally cracked. The blood drained from her face, and she turned a sickly shade of white. When Mr. Davies finished, the judge put his glasses back on. He looked directly at the HOA's lawyer. "Counselor, your client's stated purpose is to protect property values, is it not?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because it appears to me, based on this email, that your clients were engaged in what looks suspiciously like a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud and extort money from a man whose property you knew, in writing, was not under your authority. This is one of the most gross and malicious abuses of corporate power I have ever seen in this courtroom. He then looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of warmth in his eyes. "Mr. Smith," he said, his voice softening, "I have seen your family's deed, recorded in 1872. It is older than this courthouse. It has survived wars, floods, and the Great Depression. It will certainly survive this." He turned back to the court and delivered his ruling. He granted our motion for summary judgment. He declared the HOA's lien fraudulent, null, and void. He ordered it expunged from the public record immediately. He officially and permanently quieted the title to my home. In that moment, a year of terror, anxiety, and sleepless nights just dissolved. The weight on my chest vanished. Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness or anger, but of pure, unadulterated relief. I had won. My home was mine again, safe. But getting my house back, clearing the title, wasn't the end of the story. Mr. Davies was clear. We had stopped the bleeding, but we hadn't treated the wound. We had to make them pay to create a consequence so severe that they, or any other HOA, would think twice before ever trying something like this again. Our countersuit for wrongful lien, slander of title, and punitive damages went forward. Faced with their own malicious emails and the judge's scathing rebuke from the summary judgment hearing, the HOA's insurance carrier saw the writing on the wall. They knew that if this went before a jury, the damages could be astronomical. They quickly moved to settle. Mr. Davies, now holding all the cards, was ruthless in his negotiations. The settlement they agreed to was substantial. It covered every single cent of my legal fees, which were considerable. It included significant damages for the slander of title that had encumbered my property for over a year. And, most importantly to me, it included a large sum for the emotional distress they had caused me and my family. It was a formal, financial admission of their wrongdoing. The news of the lawsuit, the settlement, and the content of those damning emails ripped through the Heritage Pines community like a wildfire. Homeowners were furious to learn that their dues, the money they paid for pool maintenance and landscaping, had been used to fund a personal illegal vendetta by their board president. They were paying a law firm to harass a man who wasn't even a member of their community. An emergency community meeting was called. It was, from what I heard, a public crucifixion. Karen, the architect of the whole scheme, was voted off the board in a humiliating landslide. I later heard from a neighbor that she and her husband sold their house in less than a month and moved away in disgrace, unable to face the community they had betrayed. The third-party management company, including the ever-helpful Carol, was fired immediately. And in a stroke of bitter, beautiful irony, the HOA's insurance carrier either dropped them or skyrocketed their premiums, forcing a massive special assessment on all the members to cover the cost. The cost of their board's corruption was now being paid, quite literally, by the very people they were supposed to serve. For me, the real victory wasn't the money. It came the day I held the stamped, certified court order confirming the title to my home was quieted forever against any claim from them. I stood on my front porch, holding that piece of paper. The sun was shining. The old oak tree's leaves rustled in the breeze. I looked at the house, my house, the black shutters, the stone wall, the antique weather vane. It was all still there. It was safe. The feeling wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was profound peace. The sanctuary had been violated, but now it was restored. The ghosts of anxiety were gone, replaced once more by the quiet, comforting spirits of my ancestors. This whole nightmare taught me a powerful and, frankly, terrifying lesson. The world is full of bullies. They don't always use their fists. Sometimes they use clipboards, violation notices, and fraudulent legal documents. They will try to take what's yours simply because they think they can get away with it. They rely on you being too scared, too tired, or too broke to fight back. They weaponize bureaucracy and count on your despair, but they aren't invincible. Their greatest weakness is their own arrogance. You have to be willing to stand your ground, even when your legs are shaking. You have to be willing to push back, document everything, and find the right people to stand with you. And you must never, ever give up. The fight is hard, it is expensive, and it will take a piece of you. But your home, your history, and your peace of mind are worth fighting for. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had a nightmare experience with an HOA or a neighbor who thought they were the law? I want to hear about it. Let me know your story in the comments below. I read them all, and I find strength in knowing I'm not alone. And finally, if you want to hear more stories about everyday people fighting for their rights and winning, make sure to like this video and subscribe. It tells the platforms that these stories of justice matter, and that we won't be silenced. Thank you for listening,